I haven't been at my best this week, but I'm a bit better today, so here goes. I'm your host, JD, episode 16. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about all the friendships I've had since I was born. So this won't take but 5 minutes. Well, friendship is such a personal experience, unique to each person, that it might help to define it more precisely. I believe a friend is a person with whom one shares a very deep and personal connection, is able to share with and confide in, and who is always there for each other no matter what. It is such a specific definition that, if I were to use it, I would, in fact, have never had any friends, which I also believe to be the case. So, for the sake of this episode, I will include all those persons with whom I shared any level of interaction, whether face to face, in writing, or electronically. Broadening the definition will allow me to include at least a few people who fit the criteria. Which brings me to my first friend, Seth. I don't actually remember Seth in any capacity, but my mother claimed that I used to play with him when I was very young. I don't know if that was in my birth home or the home I grew up in. So it must have been when I was around 3 years of age. Following that was Paul, who I have ghostly recollections of. We played He-Man together, so it must have been either preschool or kindergarten. My mother, who had several friends of her own at that time, also had friends with children my age that I used to play with. From my mother's friend Linda, there were the boy and girl Peter and his sister, whose name escapes me at the moment. We sometimes swam in their above ground swimming pool. We also played a lot of Uno and other board games. From my mother's friend Diane, there were the boys Robert and Anthony. With them, I often played, or rather watched them play, computer games like those from the Sierra collection, specifically Manhunter New York and Quest for Glory. Occasionally, I also partook. They also had an in-ground pool, and while I did play with these children, albeit infrequently, I hadn't seen them outside these encounters, and we never established deep friendships. They also never went to any of my schools. Concurrently, I had also been playing with a few children in first and second grade, specifically Don and Greg, who lived in my neighborhood. I don't really remember doing anything with them, though. In second and third grade, there was Chris and Joseph, two children with whom I often role-played Ghostbusters during recess. But I never played with them outside of school. In third grade, I met Patrick, with whom I often played Nintendo. He was deeply interested in sports, so I joined Little League with him for one summer. Later, in fourth grade, I met Harlan, who had just moved into my neighborhood, and we played together, though mostly Nintendo and computer games. I chatted with him infrequently, making him the closest thing to a friend I had at that time. Then, in fifth grade, I met Darren, a boy who moved from Iowa, and he joined our little group of Harlan and me. Mostly we just talked, well, they talked and I listened, during our lunch break in the cafeteria. And that ended my elementary school. After fifth grade, I'm guessing Darren moved back to Iowa because I never saw him again. Sometime in the middle of 6th grade, Harlan moved as well, though I wasn't told of this until much later. He moved to Florida, so I didn't have a group starting in middle school. And, in fact, I continued not having any friends for some time thereafter. For a while, between middle school and high school, I walked home with two kids, Joe and Josh, and while I wasn't friends with them in particular, we occasionally spent time together. They were both more or less delinquent students, not the kind I really associated with as an honor student myself. When I was 16, my mother, younger brother, and I took a trip called Club Getaway, a kind of live-in camp. There I met a few kids my age, but one in particular, Nicole, with whom I chatted infrequently. I sent her a letter or two since then, but hadn't corresponded with her beyond that. When I was in 11th grade, I met Wendy, a strange girl I talked with occasionally. But I'll make another video devoted to her. That continued until I started college. I expected to meet several people in college, but never really got involved with anyone in particular. There was Jason, the more or less spokesperson of our department's class, who sometimes organized outings for us. The last time I talked with him was during our 10-year college reunion. Then there was Edward and Julia, two students in my class with whom I worked. I was fairly friendly with Julia, but she transferred to a different college during the second year, so I never spoke with her again. I wasn't close to any of my roommates, most being seniors and not even in my department, except Mike and our other roommate, with whom I often played GoldenEye on the N64. But after a year, I never saw them again, which ends my college experience. Since graduation, I had become even less associated with others. I never spent time with anyone in the companies I worked for. I spent a lot of time on AOL and in chat groups, especially the Britney Spears chat group, where I met a few people, but only one with whom I shared a modicum of interest. There was one girl, Vicky, who was interested in both Britney Spears and Final Fantasy. So we often role-played together online or joined chat games. But eventually AOL did away with its chat groups, and we became separated. In 2007, I met Natasha, who became a kind of soulmate to me. And I maintained correspondence with her until about 2012, when I basically ran out of money. I'll make a separate video just for her. Then I joined Facebook and got involved with the Philippines community, where I met Ashana and Akishi, my two closest friends from that side of the world. Also, I met Santina and Elaine, and, well, I never really did anything with them. They were very demanding of me and only maintained friendships as long as I paid them, which, in retrospect, was a bad situation. There was also Kim, with whom I developed a kind of relationship in 2011 and met in person in 2014. Also in 2011, I began corresponding with several people in China, especially my friends Peng, Shakun, and Jiang. Lots of Chinese people corresponded with me during my unemployment, mostly in Chinese, but those three especially. Peng I met in person last year, and we even still communicate from time to time. But the others, I never met face to face, and have since lost communication with. Shakun didn't speak much English, but he tried to help me learn Chinese. Chung often did video chats with me. even though she couldn't speak any English. It was for her that I moved to China, but she got married and moved before I arrived. While living in Chengdu, I met my first roommate, Blake, with whom I often hung out. He was also from Iowa. There was also Lex and Chris, some staff that I spent time with on occasion, and they showed me around the city. With Lex, I saw Jingli Alley, and with Chris, I saw the wide and narrow alley. Then I met the love of my life, Yui, about whom I made a previous video. I spent more time with her than with anyone else, and she was by far the closest person in my life. Even closer than my soulmate, Natasha, with whom I corresponded with, but never met face to face. Unfortunately, our relationship was shaky from the very beginning, on and off until she moved to Japan in 2016. While living in Chengdu in December 2014, I formed a small group with Blake, a kid from Texas named Josh, and a British girl named Francesca. We spent time together, mostly in January, but Francesca died in February 2015. My roommate quit and subsequently moved in March, and Josh left China in April. This ended our group. I too moved in February and hadn't really developed any close friendships since. There was another coworker, Rachel, who also took me around town to various temples and a park where I saw the Dufu thatched cottage. So I guess we were kind of close. I sometimes spent time with Sunny, another coworker, who actually ended up dating my roommate for a while before moving to Thailand. And Pauline, another local teacher from my school, who also ended up dating my roommate. Besides Yui, she was the person from Chengdu I cared about second most. And during my downtime with Yui, I often sought her out just to make me feel better. There was also Amy, an older woman I somehow met online, and we spent some time together as well. There was Jingjing, a college student who worked at a restaurant I sometimes frequented near my work, and we hooked up as well. And Linda, a girl from Chongqing I met online and sometimes visited as well. So I wouldn't exactly call my Chengdu experience terrible. Well, after 2015, I moved to Qingbaijiang, a district of Chengdu but far from the city center, so I stopped corresponding with just about everyone there. Then in 2016, I moved to Beijing, but I hadn't developed any relationships there and moved to Japan in 2017. I moved to Japan solely to be with my angel, Yui. I didn't have any good relationships with anyone in Japan. The people at work were just that, people I worked with, and nothing more. There was Robert, a person who worked with my company but never in the same office as me. We met up sometimes for drinks, but nothing ever came of it. And then there was Sarah, who started maybe about 6 months after I did and spent time with Robert and me. She also had feelings for Robert. Both of them cut me off after I lost my job. I started building up my relationship with Yui, then I lost my job in Japan and had to move back to China, effectively ending my relationship with Yui. While in China, I didn't really develop any close friendships. I met up with another girl, Linda, one of my students. I also spent time with Angela, and we did karaoke, but mostly because I was just lonely. Then I left Changzhou and moved to Jinan, where I had been alone ever since. And that's the story of my friendships from my youth through adulthood. Even with the broader definition, it only amounted to about 50 people in the 40 years of my existence. Besides Yui, and to a much lesser extent Natasha, there was no one else I was ever particularly close to. And that's it. And if you like my story, feel free to give it a like, share, comment, and subscribe. And you can support me on my Patreon. Link below. Thank you again for your time, and I'll see you next time.